So, good afternoon. I'm Shorna Kazi. I'm a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. And together with my colleagues Ignacio Rutia and Matthijs van Ledden, we're going to be presenting to you the key recommendations of the new report, Bangladesh Enhancing Coastal Resilience in a Changing Climate. Next slide, please. So, coastal Bangladesh, it's home to over 40 million people. Uh, it's, I lost the slide. Did you lose the
Swarna,
slide?
just switch on your camera so that
Okay.
people can see you, and they are just trying to figure out that. And okay, we
Okay.
can see you now. It's just a matter of we bringing back the slides.
All right. Okay, so I see the slide. Shall I move forward?
No, the slide is not here on the big screen, so they are trying to. Okay, then enlarge it as before. No, then enlarge it like before. Yeah, you do that. Okay, so Anna, that doesn't work. So we go like we were doing earlier, right?
Okay. Can you go to the earlier slide? Earlier slide.
Yeah, you're
All
here.
right. All right. Okay. So coastal Bangladesh, it's home to over 40 million people. Its physical characteristics, as well as its livelihood of its people, it's defined by this delta, which is one of the largest, most populated, active, and dynamic deltas in the world. The coastal zone, it has many economic opportunities with fertile land, proximity to coastal waters with vast areas for agriculture, tidal rivers, and coast for fisheries activities, as well as ports and thriving industries. Next slide, please. So the impact of climate change is nowhere more apparent than in the coastal zone of Bangladesh. The country is standing on the front lines in the battle against climate change, and slow progressing impacts such as sea level rise and salinity intrusion endanger the coastal zone. Next. So, in the coastal zone, cyclones are the most well known hazard, with Bangladesh being ranked number one in vulnerability to tropical cyclones in the world. On average, the coastline of Bangladesh it's hit by a major cyclone every 3 years. So the 1970 cyclone Bola, which was the world's deadliest tropical cyclone on record, it had resulted in over 300,000 lives lost. Next slide. So fast forward 50 years, fatalities have since declined by 100-fold. Also, agricultural output has increased significantly, and economic assets have been less damaged by cyclone winds and storm surges. Next slide. So this remarkable progress, it's the result of systematic investments in resilience over the last decades. So it's protecting lives, livelihoods, and assets from disasters, which has been really the key to Bangladesh's development strategy. And this was done through policy and institutional strengthening, protective infrastructure investments like coastal embankments, multi-purpose disaster shelters, improved forecasting, community-based early warning systems, as well as enhancing analytics for resilience. But it really is evident that more action is necessary to preserve growth and prosperity of the coastal zone. So, recent impacts to the polders and its communities of cyclones like Bulbul in 2019 and Amphan in 2020, they remind us how vulnerable these coastlines are. still for these various weather events. And there are other well-known issues like waterlogging in certain part of the coast and climate change that are all, and as well as increasing population that add the need for action. Next slide. So to ensure growth and prosperity, further enhancing coastal resilience is key. So how do you do that? Well, you learn from the past, you adopt good practices, and you also shape future interventions. So this new report, Bangladesh Enhancing Coastal Resilience in a Changing Climate, this was just launched in September in Dhaka, has taken this approach where you're looking into past initiatives that have taken place, and it also provides various innovative and inspirational insights to address impacts of climate-related hazards in the coastal zone. Next slide. So the content of this report, it was really based on very extensive analytical work that included data analysis, modeling, some preliminary designs that were carried out with support of various national and international consultants with really wide-ranging stakeholder consultations since 2019. It included government agencies, academia, key experts, development partners, and with just workshops and discussions to validate these results. Also, we also had knowledge exchanges that were conducted to see various good practices and also to see the inspirational examples in countries like the Netherlands. Next slide. So to achieve Bangladesh's aspiration to become a safe, sustainable, and resilient delta, 7 key recommendations for a way forward have been suggested in this report. And these will be further discussed by my colleagues in the next slide. So let me hand over to Matthias.
Thank you, Swana. Next slide, please. So the first recommendation is that Bangladesh should shift its trajectory on operation and maintenance, so O&M, to ensure that investments in drainage structures and embankments keep providing the benefits for their communities during their lifetime. It's a well-known lesson from global studies that dollars spent on operation and maintenance reduce capital investments in rehabilitation of infrastructure manifold. And putting this first, since it's getting the basics right, this one will also make other recommendations much more effective. Next slide, please. So how to improve O&M? The analytics of this report showed 3 things. First, the yearly funding for more staff and also more regular maintenance works must be increased substantially to move from emergency measures maintenance to regular maintenance. Second, modern technology can help to improve O&M by automating structures, having easy apps to follow protocols for inspection, having a GIS database structure to collect and update O&M information. And third, further increase community involvement in O&M and build in more technical capacity at this level to monitor closely the infrastructure, do regular maintenance works, and guide more intense maintenance works done by contractors. In any new coastal program, this aspect must be taken up and steps must be formulated to improve O&M. Next slide, please. A second foundational pillar is that Bangladesh should further invest in in-depth knowledge of the coast and make this an integral part of the design and implementation of interventions. A successful example is that the current long-term monitoring and research program in the Coastal Embankment Improvement Program Phase 1 is of direct use to inform the feasibility studies for the next program of investments. Next slide. So what are the key ingredients in this? Similar programs in other countries show this. First, monitor systematically the coast and the structures to understand what is happening. Second, use and develop state-of-the-art models to understand what happens and run scenarios of what might happen to be informed. And third, share and apply this knowledge to inform new investment programs and train the next generation in this practice. Bangladesh should take this opportunity of long-term monitoring and research from CEIP1, which is an ideal catalyst to further expand and continuously reap the benefits of improved knowledge through more efficient and effective investments. Next slide, please. A third pillar is to adopt adaptive delta management, which embraces flexible decision-making, allowing for uncertain futures. Bringing ADM into practice, it is paramount to use a risk-based approach. Now, this is applied in Bangladesh at project level, but there is a need to upscale this to the entire cycle of coastal planning, design, and O&M to become more effective in adaptive delta management. Next slide, please. So how can this be achieved in Bangladesh? Well, first, develop a risk management framework which links strategic tasks, roles and responsibilities and timelines from continuous improvements to coastal resilience. Second, set tolerable risk guidelines to have a uniform system of targets for all agencies involved. And third, mainstream this risk-based approach in planning, design, and O&M guidelines to ensure concerted efforts to increase coastal resilience. Countries like the United States and the Netherlands, but also, for instance, Vietnam, have risk frameworks and tolerable risk levels in place to guide future investments in coastal resilience, which show to be very effective. This table that you see here on the slide is an example of the sea defenses in Vietnam, which are classified according to the protected area and population and have different safety levels. Next slide, please. Evaluation of past interventions in Bangladesh highlights that there is a vast and untapped potential for smart hybrid combinations of traditional infrastructure with nature-based solutions. Sediment solutions, such as nourishments, and mangrove restoration for protection against cyclones and erosion can complement the traditional infrastructure built in Bangladesh and result in additional co-benefits. This graphic here at this slide shows an alternative soft solution with dredging and dumping of sediments to protect polder 35/1 as an alternative for traditional bank protection with concrete cubes and geobags. And this soft solution turns out to be more cost effective and is more flexible. Next slide, please. The following can be done to achieve more nature-based solutions and hybrid solutions in Bangladesh. First, lead implementation inspirational examples of nature-based solutions, hybrid and multifunctional solutions in Bangladesh. Second, develop suitability maps where the solutions may work. The map at this slide to the right is a first example of mapping potential for combining mangrove restoration with embankment work. This is very useful input in studies to tackle problems in specific areas. And third, do active monitoring and learning from examples that have been implemented. Experts from Bangladesh, together with us, have visited several of these inspirational examples, like the sand engine in the Netherlands. Inspired by this is an artist impression on the lower side of the slide, an artist impression of the coast at Kolatoli and Inani Beach, how this could look like to ensure coastline stability, but also boost tourism and improve the attractiveness of the coastline. And now I would like to hand it over to my colleague Ignacio.
Thank you very much, Matthijs. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit about the last three recommendations of the book, which are more of the big picture recommendations that we think also will be applicable to other contexts. So the first one is the risk-sensitive land use planning. As we all know, the changes in the land use and the socioeconomic characteristics will shape the composition of the coastal zones in terms of what is at risk, where is it, and how is it at risk. And given that there's a very long time horizon for some of these investments, particularly the large infrastructure, the planning has to take into account the interactions between the society, the natural environment, and the human-made assets. And at the end, the interventions should be able to be robust under a large variety of scenarios to perform well, especially if planning horizons are very long. Some of these investments are very large, and we have to expect them to be adaptable to different uses as time goes by. Therefore, land use planning helps with the allocation also of economic activities and can guide spatial direction of development. If it is combined with an integrated risk management framework, the interventions not only would be more optimal from an outcome perspective, but they can also help to reduce the cost and rationalize them in time, so you can prioritize better where you want to protect assets or communities, and how are they at risk. Sorry, there was a strange echo. So you can rationalize your resources in time. And there are several tools to do this, and I invite you all to look into the examples that we provide. Next slide, please. The recommendation number 6 is strengthening adaptive capacity of livelihoods. At the end of the day, one of the biggest findings, and I think that this is also relevant in many places around the world, is that in order for the design of the sustainable solutions, no matter the scale of the solution, the intervention not only have to be aligned with the needs and aspirations of the local communities, but the communities themselves have to be at the center of originating and implementing the solutions. In many of these places, the local communities have the skills, have the local knowledge, the experience, and they also have the networks to self-organize and undertake the actions to increase their resilience and to reduce their vulnerability. So strengthening the adaptive capacity of the coastal livelihoods ensures that the coastal inhabitants have the ability and the means to make a living under the various shocks and stressors they face, and also looking at the long-term trends and scenarios. Therefore, in order to achieve this, it's crucial to set up structures and dedicated resources. We found that in many instances, there is a lot of lip service to the involvement of communities, but we do, in the book, for example, provide very specific examples and recommendations about how to set up structures and processes to ensure that the views of the communities are included, but also that they're originators and implementers and participate in a real participatory way on these interventions. Next slide, please. And the final recommendation is to look at coastal resilience within the context of overall development. Coastal resilience is not an objective in itself. It is a function of the overall development objectives of the country. So the development objectives have to be the starting point for coastal resilience planning. So we present in the book some examples and recommendations on how to develop frameworks to make decisions in the interplay between the development objectives, coastal resilience interventions, and the aspirations and the spaces. And a growing body of work shows that the limitations of traditional evaluation criteria, that's when you do simple cost-benefit analysis, sometimes you lose some of these nuances, and that favors communities with more assets as opposed of poorer communities. And we, again, present some recommendations on how to improve the frameworks and how to broaden the considerations of well-being and the virtuous cycle that investments that reduce risk can achieve. When an area is protected, not only is the risk to people and assets lower, but it also increases the value of land. It incentivizes long-term investments because people, the area is less at risk, and also changes migration decisions, among many, many other benefits. Over to you, Sharna.
Next slide, please. Okay, so these 7 recommendations, they have been based really on this solid analytical work and analysis. Next slide. And it's very clear from the report that there's ample opportunity to invest in coastal resilience that will bring multiple benefits in terms of avoided losses, wider economic, social, and environmental benefits. Next slide. We would like to thank everyone who has contributed to this report. It would not have been possible without the various consultancies and engagement and really enthusiasm of the many people that we worked with. We also thank you for joining this discussion. What we're doing here is we're just sharing with you the links to the report and all of the various material. And next slide, we will show a video that summarizes the key messages from this report. It's a short 4 or 5 minute video. And then afterwards, if you have any questions, we're here. So if you could play the video, please. Can you play the video?
Yes, the video is going on.
Okay.
Shona, we finished playing the video. So, any questions, colleagues? I think, Shona, I was expecting you to introduce the team, but I can introduce. We did not introduce the team before. Swarna Kasi is a senior disaster risk management specialist based in Bangladesh, working for the South Asia Disaster Risk Management Team. Ignacio Urrutia is based in Bangkok. He is also a senior disaster risk management specialist working for the South Asia Disaster Risk Management Team. I think Mata is used to be a GFDRR staff. He's working mostly in LAC, I know. He's a coastal engineer, a consultant for the team. So, any questions to the team? Clara has a question. Clara Ariza is one of the bank consultants. So,
Yes, hello. Congratulations on the report. I'm looking forward to reading it. I worked quite extensively in that region of the world. And I have two questions. The first one is, what about governance? What kind of governance structure do you think is needed to implement the recommendations in the report? Because what we know from Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal basically is that there are disasters, and then everybody rushes in to support the emergency efforts, and reconstruction and recovery takes place in a very disorganized way. So how do we ensure that your recommendations are taken into account in an organized, coordinated manner? So that's my first question. And the second question relates to the issue of coordinated migration. So from the studies I conducted there 3 or 4 years ago, what we learned was that, in fact, coastal communities, and they are highly diverse, but some coastal communities are so poor that actually coordinating migration towards the cities or towards the center of the country would just increase their vulnerability and bring them to live in slums, as they did not have the capacities or the skills to really adapt and have a dignified life in Dhaka or any other of the main cities. So, how do you see this coordinated migration happening, considering that not all coastal communities have the skills that were presented in the report now in the presentation? Thank you.
Clara, maybe I can start, and then I will hand over to my colleagues if they could further add to it. Maybe I start with the second one, which is on the coordinated migration. So really, I think this is something that you see it in both ways. One is looking at just making sure that you have more protected areas in these coastal areas as well. I mean, where you don't have to go for that forward of that migration, but then also having and Bangladesh I see is already doing that, where these coastal secondary cities. I think you may have worked in the Khulna region or in Mongla area, that they are providing better service, having more climate resilient infrastructure there. Jobs and skills are being also beneficiaries are being able to have better jobs and better skills, access to more jobs, and in areas that they wouldn't have had further. So the migration, not all coming to Dhaka, which was one of the biggest issues that we've had in the past, because as you know, Dhaka is about 20,000 people per square kilometer. It's incredibly congested, but having just more secondary towns around the country where people can take move towards if needed. But what we've also seen, just in the areas that we're working in our coastal embankment improvement project, with some protection in these coastal areas that the government is financing, just by how it seems the markets are working, we have seen that there are now various industries that have kind of developed in this area, where they're also providing even further protection levels as well. So I find that it's a quite a combination and dynamic system that's in place, and just ensuring that you're providing those kind of services that you need to have both the protection and then also some of the requirements in these secondary areas. I do want to ask either of my colleagues if they would want to add anything further.
Sure, very quickly. I mean, I think that the issue of organized or coordinated migration is, I don't think that the issue of migration is very complex, as you very well know. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about individual decisions of people and families. And these decisions have to do as much with sort of push factors of when the areas where they don't have economic opportunities or they are at risk, but also pull factors of where the jobs are and where the economic development is happening. And as I was alluding to when I said in the final recommendation, Bangladesh is actually looking at this in a very holistic way, and the way that they're looking at it is actually from a spatial development perspective, and where are their development priorities and where are these opportunities going to be developed in order to then attract people to move to these places for economic opportunities. So, and this is what Shana was mentioning about the port areas, the economic zones, and others. So the issue of migration is actually very much at the center of the government's planning, but it is not an issue necessarily of how do you coordinate the migration itself, but it's more about how do you make the investments and create the incentives for the private sector as well to develop in a spatial way, in a way that makes sense within your objectives and your long-term objectives, and also, of course, the risk profile. And I don't know, Sharon, if maybe you want to take also the first one, but I mean, the issue of governance, again, I don't think we have, this will require a full-on session about governance. There are many aspects. And again, if you, this is a little bit of advertisement for the book as well, but if you look at the number of stakeholders, not only government, but also, again, as I said, private sector and civil society, that are involved in these investments and these interventions and everything that happens in the dynamic in the coastal that affect coastal resilience is huge. And there are mechanisms that exist there, and this is also why, I mean, the book is the result of our consultations and our work with them, and so this is also a product of co-creation. And we found in our experience so far in the last few months of socializing the findings that there is a lot of ownership at the local level. But at the end of the day, I also don't think that there's a simple answer for the governance question. But these are my quick 2 cents.
If I may add on the governance, and I think it's also just the coordination aspect as well. And again, we going back to the book, it's how the government has taken a step through this kind of institutional and policy strengthening and things that hadn't been in place before. Who does what, how it's done. There's this standing order on disasters, which provides the roles and responsibilities of various government agencies and officials of what is needed to do. So in some senses, you're starting to put the framework and foundations that hadn't been there, say, even 20 years ago, and that's there now. So that's the starting step. You have various laws in place where if there is some kind of cyclone, you are obligated by law to provide shelter if you have a standing place that has that kind of building structure. You have also things that you didn't have earlier, even just, I would say, even 11 years ago or 12 years ago, when there was a disaster event. You would have all of the various NGOs and UN partners having their own needs assessment. And over just the last, I think, few years now, there's only this one kind of coordinated humanitarian coordination task team, which brings together it has a combination of government and development partners and NGOs on what are the needs in this area. So you're coordinating yourself, which I had not seen earlier. And I think these are just various steps that are moving into a way that you have more governance, because there's an understanding amongst the various partners what is really what's happened and what requirements there are, what the community needs. And I don't know if anyone would like to add on this, but it's technology which you didn't have before as well. Before and after. I mean, you have more drone facilities, things that you can see what's there now that we didn't. I would say just even a few years ago, these weren't there, and so you try to harness these things as information technology, data, and use it to have a better governance system, I think. And you're just having to move in that direction because these disasters continue, but you have a little bit better organization of these emergency efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Arna. Thanks, Ignacio. Any more questions?
I wonder, Suranga, if there's anyone from from government, or you were saying Red Cross, if they'd like to add on to anything that we've said as well, from Bangladesh. Please let them.
I think he's not here. So yeah. You lost Ignacio one. Oh no, thanks so much, Sarna. Seems like Naraya has a question. Naraya is from the LAC DRM team in the bank.
Hello, thank you for this report, and nice to see you, Matthias, at least on the screen. Just so a little bit on the part on the governance, etc. But from all these recommendations, is the government selecting a few to really implement them, or they need to do it in a package? Or because now I understand that this is based also on the experience in the last years, but following going forward. So are there already one of those recommendations that are taking on to implement, or what needs to be done to really implement those recommendations?
I'm wondering, Matthias, if you would like, on the technical part, would you like to start on that? Because we see that's already part of the feasibility for the next step. So,
Yeah.
or would you like me to start? Okay.
Yeah, I think the question I think is very good, in the sense that of course it's easy to write down 7 recommendations, but ultimately it's about, let's say, that somebody is going to run with it and do something with it. What you do see, and I think that's also because of the long-term engagement of the bank in these programs, the advantage of that is that some of the recommendations that have been put forward are now already being put into practice. Like, for instance, the better use of knowledge of the system, for instance, the behavior of the system in terms of hydrodynamics and morphology. That was a large component within this coastal embankment improvement program phase 1. So a large consortium has been working on generating much more knowledge about the behavior of these tidal channels and the coast in general at various spatial and temporal scales. And what is now also ongoing is the feasibility study for the next phase of coastal interventions. Partly because maybe of the recommendations, but partly of this natural process of generating knowledge and then using it, let's say, for the next cycle of interventions. What you now see is that the information that has been generated with these detailed models and also the analytics that has been done on, for instance, bank erosion of tidal channels, that is now being used to inform the next cycle of investments, and also try to do it better in terms of design of all these interventions than it was done before. So I think that is one example of doing that. Maybe one other example to mention is, and I think I also mentioned it in the presentation, if you look to the challenge of operation and maintenance, I think everybody is recognizing that operation and maintenance needs to be improved to make these investments in coastal intervention sustainable for the long term. What we currently are doing, let's say, is parallel to the feasibility studies of the new interventions, is also to see what kind of possible interventions could be designed such for the next program to also improve the O&M part, both on the governance side, so with the existing bodies that already work on O&M, like the water management organizations, for instance, in Bangladesh, and the water board, of course, but also try to see, okay, what kind of, for instance, technology is out there, let's say, that can also help these communities and these organizations to make O&M more efficient. And of course, also try to see how the designs, let's say, for the next cycle of interventions can be made such, let's say, that you don't have these very intensive kind of O&M issues that we've seen in the past. So I think at various fronts, the bottom line is at various fronts there is work done to try to implement these recommendations. Yeah. Juana?
Thank you very much. Swara, anything to add? Please go ahead.
No, the design of the report, as we had mentioned also, and I think this is really quite important in anything, is that it was very consultative, and it didn't really come just from us, but it was driven through what were the needs of the government, what were the discussions that we've been having with them for many years. It's not just a report of a 6-month study that has come out of that. It's years of work that we have with them, and just trying to identify what areas that they need support on. So it's the book is quite big. So if you have a chance, if you see it, then you'll see there's a lot of things that the government specifically would be able to use just on the technical designs, but then also overall how they are embracing these recommendations are things that they are also thinking about to move towards more coastal resilience initiatives. But I think from our end, that it really has been the positive outcome of the book. Yes. So thank you, Saranga. Nothing further from us.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Are we good? Thank you very much, guys. I know it's very, very late in your part of the world. Thank you so much. It's a very interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to see you soon, and we miss you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saranga.
All right.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Enjoy
Thanks,
it.
everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.